And we are live here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter per usual. What's up, guys? Nick here on the P2W Fantasy Podcast. Have two great guests on tonight. Very excited about this show. I have one guy who's been on a few shows and one guy who I've been waiting to link up with, and tonight's that night. We have some football going on, so this show won't run into that game. Big day, big game, and we have a lot of things to talk about today. But before we get into anything, I do want to make sure that I run through both of our guests here and talk a little bit about them, but let them talk about themselves because they both are very busy in the space. So to start things off, I got Jeremy on the show. Not his first time. It's probably, you've been on here a handful of times, Jeremy. We've been rocking some shows back in the past here. But Jeremy, member of the FSWA, you write for a variety of articles such as waivers and rankings for SGPN Network. I was checking that out earlier today. Also write for Yards Per. You do starts and sits on there. I'm a big fan of Yards Per. Alex does a great job with that brand. Also the co-host for the FF Playmakers. You're involved with Dave, a.k.a. Dynasty Dorks, as well for some of his streams. And the one thing I want to give you a shout out for is badass graphics all the time. I mean, you go to this guy's profile page and you look at a pin tweet. He's got this cool Javonte Williams. He made it from scratch. Infograph with some stats. If you go to my profile, my header, he made that from scratch. I just hit him up in the DMs, and he got that out same day. So Jeremy does a great job with a lot of things. But Jeremy, can you let everybody know where they can find you, and if you want to just talk about what you've been got going on this season?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I mean, you pretty much covered it all, and like you said, a couple times, second, third, fourth time. I'm not really
Something
sure,
like
but
that.
it's always fun. It's always great. But yeah, you can find most of my writing, like you said, basically mostly at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. Like you said, I've been doing a lot of like update ranking stuff throughout the season, but it's getting to that point. A lot of the dynasty stuff starting to roll out. I've dropped a couple early 2022 draft rankings and stuff like that, but that's going to start rolling out soon. And then Yards Per, like you said, and I'm going to try and upgrade the graphics and the threads this year that I dropped last spring. So been working with it. I have somewhat of an art background, so it helps a little. So.
And it does look good. I remember back in the rookie profile days, you were dropping those like every other day, and it was really impressive. Also got Dave on the show. First time Dave and I got to link up. Both got some Chicago roots, so we have that in common. We were kind of talking about that before the podcast started. But Dave, advertising director for Football Guys. You do some NFL rankings for Fantasy Pros. You have the Launchpad show. I just checked that out on YouTube. You have the Mailbag show as well for Football Guys with Troy and Victoria, who I'm really big fans of, good friends with them as well. And then you have some articles for Football Guys, the 3 up, 3 down articles, talking about some player value changes week to week. So talk about what you got going on. Talk about where we can find you. I know you're a very busy guy.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I tell people rather than listen to all the things I'm doing. I say just follow me on Twitter at Dave Kluge, and you'll see what I'm up to nowadays. One of my favorite things to do is guesting on podcasts like I'm doing right now and getting to meet new people in the industry. So try to do that quite a bit. But you covered just about everything. Yeah, over at Football Guys, I'm doing a lot with their YouTube, trying to just bring some fresh video content over to the Football Guys brand, which has been a ton of fun. On top of the shows that they've been doing for over 10 years now, the Audible and DFS Power Grid and those awesome shows. We brought a bunch of short videos where we're just really condensing a lot of actionable information into short 3 to 5 minute videos. And that's been fun watching that kind of grow throughout the season. And then, yeah, like you said, writing, hosting a few other shows. It's fun, man. It's a fun industry to be in. I've been playing fantasy football my whole life, and I just feel blessed to be able to do this now.
Absolutely. I think we're both on the same page there. And I know it's a busy time of year, so I appreciate both of you guys taking the time out of your guys' day and out of your guys' schedule to come on this show. As always, this podcast is partnered up with the Fantasy Points Media Group. Go to fantasypoints.com. They have a big sale and a discount right now for a subscription. You can use my promo code 21WIN10, so you get a discount on top of a discount. And I'm on there every day. I'm looking at a lot of advanced data and research, but they also have articles. They have DFS content. They have everything you're really looking for, whether you play fantasy football year round or just for redraft. Great information all in one site, one-stop shop, fantasypoints.com. All right, we have a good show today, really good show. We're going to be talking about some fact or fiction statements. a lot of things happen. We had so many different pieces of news break today. It was unbelievable with all the COVID things, and had a coach get fired. There's just things that are moving pieces and happening nonstop. So a lot of times when something happens, a lot of people draw a certain feeling from it or a statement, and it's good to break things down and say, hey, this sort of statement would be a fact, or this sort of thing would be fiction. And we got a bunch of different topics here, so stick with us for the show.
I play to win, no fear to give. I feel but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best, don't trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Oh, play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win.
All right, as I said before, fact or fiction. So I'm going to read off some stats of something that happened recently in a recent week, and then I'm going to make a statement about that. And I'll ask both Dave and Jeremy their opinions. Is this a fact or is this fiction? More or the other. Nothing in between. We can't say both. It's got to be more fact, more fiction. That's the rules here. So first one on the slate here. So James Conner, last game, very Alvin Kamara-esque. He had 9 catches in that game. I think he's a bit banged up right now, but let's talk about a world where both guys in that system might be back. So he had 5 in weeks 9 and 11 as well catches. So this guy's catching the ball a lot. He's getting a ton of work. He's been awesome for fantasy football. These, of course, are in games without Chase Edmonds, who we profile as a pass-catching back. So fact or fiction, James Conner's pass-catching upside will be eliminated once Chase Edmonds is back, and both guys are in the system. Dave, let's hear your thoughts on this, if this is more fact or more fiction.
Man, you guys are going to hate to hear this, but I think that's a fact. Conner was used almost exclusively as a goal line threat when Edmonds was healthy earlier in the season. And I feel like this is something that we talk about all the time. A running back goes down and then somebody picks up the work that running back was doing. And then as that running back starts to come back, we're like, hey, maybe things are going to change. And 99 times out of 100, when that back comes back healthy, they go back to their previous roles. And that's exactly what I expect to happen here. With Edmonds earlier in the season, when he was healthy, James Conner was averaging 1.1 targets per game. Since the injury, he's averaging 5.5 targets per game. Now, when you look at Chase Edmonds, he was averaging 4.1 targets per game. So you add up what James Conner was seeing and what Chase Edmonds was seeing, and that comes almost identical to what Conner has seen over these last few weeks. So, Conner has absorbed all of that target share from Chase Edmonds, but I don't expect that to last. Edmonds is a great pass catching back, and I expect him to just go right back into that role when he's healthy.
And I can definitely see that as well, especially with seeing right now, James Conner's a little banged up from that last game, but seeing what he brings to the team and knowing that you have 2 guys, is it smarter to pound one guy until he is injured, or is it better to split the work up and utilize one guy for his upside and then another guy who just does nothing but score? But Jeremy, curious to hear fact or fiction on that. If you agree with Dave, or if you got some disagreements here on Chase Edmonds eliminating James Conner's pass catching upside. What do we think here?
I am 100% in Dave's corner. I agree. I think it's a fact. The whole reason James Conner was brought in was the pure fact that Chase Edmonds couldn't handle the inside the 20 role. We saw that with Kenyon Drake, who was kind of there before them, and then they strictly brought in James Conner, and it was what it was. The first 8 games of the season, that's kind of how they rolled the dice, and it was James Conner inside the red zone, and he was being a fantasy viable running back based on the fact that he has scored 17 touchdowns in the entire season. I mean, it's an absurd number, and that's literally what he was doing all through the first 8 games. Obviously has been now without Edmonds in, but that's just what he was doing. Chase Edmonds has 1 touchdown all year, and Chase Edmonds' viability is just because he is a pass-catching running back, and he's always done it. That's been his career. It's kind of been his MO, and like Dave said, once he returns, it's just going to go back to that, along with the fact that Kyler Murray's back. I mean, James Conner saw also the benefits of having Colt McCoy play a couple of those games, who was far less mobile than Kyler Murray, so there was a little bit more of that dump-off work and kind of getting out to the playmakers. So for me, I feel like James Conner still could possibly be viable, but he's not. He's definitely going to lose his pass-catching upside with Chase Edmonds returning.
You look at the first handful of weeks for Chase Edmonds, you go down the list, 4, 5, 7, 4 as far as balls he caught. So he's obviously very involved, and he was straight out the gate. Piggyback question. You guys can jump in as you want to. Does this mean we should be concerned at all for James Conner's value maybe in the fantasy playoffs? Let's say everybody's healthy. Jump in.
No.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like Jeremy said, he was a viable target or candidate before just because of that goal line work, and this is still a powerhouse offense. That goal line work isn't going to go anywhere. He was averaging pretty much a touchdown a game prior to the Edmonds injury. So, yeah, his value obviously takes a hit. Right now he's basically playing like a top 5 running back every single week, and you're not going to get that, but he's still a high-end RB2 even when Edmonds comes back.
Yeah, I agree exactly. Dave pretty much nailed it right there. Again, RB2, possibly either way, you can flex him. You know what I mean? So,
and you just got to figure, like Dave just said, I mean, high power offense, they're going to be in good field positions for him to still be successful, him to still get those red zone carries too. We saw last year, like guy like James Robinson, he was really valuable, but what was he missing? The red zone opportunities, because they were hardly in the red zone versus the Cardinals that are going to be in that area of the field. So we'll keep on the running back train as far as guys coming back. Some guys were banged up. We'll go to the Rams backfield now. It's a good little transition right there. But Darrell Henderson, he's missed the last 2 games for the Rams, which left Sony Michel as the primary back. He faced the Jaguars and the Cardinals. Michel carried the ball for 121 and 79 rushing yards across those 2 games. He averaged 5 and 4 yards per carry, so he rushed the ball pretty well. Henderson has a chance now to be activated from the COVID list and be back potentially. So that draws the question. I mean, Sony Michel's been pretty good. Henderson was the lead back. Fact or fiction? Sony Michel may have won this starting job even when Henderson is back. Fact or fiction? We'll flip it and go with Jeremy first.
Fiction. It kind of alludes back to what we talked about with James Conner. You could even argue we saw it with David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert. It's the same old premise of just the lead guy was Darrell Henderson coming into the season. They brought in Sony Michel on the pure fact of just a backup running back who has the capabilities to do what he has done. You know what I mean? In the NFL, they don't care about fantasy. It's about winning games. And Sony Michel is a great fill-in back / spell back for what Darrell Henderson does. So for me, it's just Sony Michel saw the benefit of facing the Jaguars. That was his big game. It was a weaker defense, easily done. And the scheme that they run in LA allows that almost any running back to be pretty much viable. All in the beginning of the season, we saw people jonesing over Xavier Jones, Jake Funk, like all these guys, because they just look so good when they're in that offense. And so for me, I just think that Sony Michel's still just the backup guy. We saw it earlier in week 3 when he stepped in and he played and took the lead role, saw that. I think he had what did he have? He had 67 yards or so, a decent week against Tampa Bay. And then the next week it was Darrell Henderson. So for me, I think as soon as Henderson's active, Sony Michel loses all his value.
And real quick, not to change the subject, but we got asked, there was a contest before the show started. I said, hey, guess the Chicago jersey I'm wearing. And I think Abe, who I'll be Venmoing, was the first guess. He's like, Lonzo Ball, and it's Lonzo Ball. I thought I was gonna get everybody. It could be any sport. Abe's the winner for that. We're going back to Jeremy. I think you bring up a good point. Just seeing, Sony Michel started, I think it was week 3, Tampa Bay, and then Henderson came back, grabbed that job right away. Sometimes that's how it works. We saw with Dalvin Cook in this last game. I don't know. He looks banged up still. I'm not sure if he's gonna split the work with Madison, and he just did nothing but carry the ball in this past week for the Vikings. But on the flip side, you look at the Packers, we're not going to compare, which duo is better, but Aaron Jones comes back. Both guys are getting some work. So I think it's definitely important to address this topic, but you bring up some good points there. Dave, curious to hear, are you on the same page as Jeremy, or do you disagree? So we're talking about the potential fact or fiction that Sony Michel wins this job.
I'm going to agree. So far, we're 2 for 2, Jeremy. I got nothing to disagree with you so far. And, I love that you bring up the Packers situation, because that is kind of a unique circumstance. These guys have such different skill sets. I mean, you saw that picture from the offseason where they're standing side by side. Like you wouldn't even know that those guys play the same position. So for them, it does make sense to get AJ Dillon going, because he brings something so different to that offense, being able to just pound the rock in the middle where Aaron Jones can't do that. On the flip side, Aaron Jones is able to run these wheel routes and get downfield and make these acrobatic catches and do things in the open field that AJ Dillon can't do. So that is kind of the outlier of a situation, just because of how vastly different those two running backs are. But Yeah, I'm saying that this is fiction as well. I'm agreeing with Jeremy here. Sean McVay just came out a couple days ago and said that the Rams team is better when Darrell Henderson is the lead back. I mean, poor Sony Michel having to hear that. You don't want to hear that when you step in and have a good game, but it's the truth. And I was talking to Andrew Cooper earlier today, and he pointed out that the Rams are the most consolidated offense in the NFL. They pretty much have the same 11 guys on the field almost every single play. So I like Michel a lot. I think that he's got some talent, and I don't think that he's ever really gotten a fair shake in the NFL. But Henderson is just a very good running back. I was huge on him in the offseason, love seeing what he's doing now. And he's getting more run this year, obviously, now with Cam Akers being out. But, compared to last year, he is also seeing a ton of extra work as a pass catcher. He only has 4 more carries than he did all of last season, but he surpassed his target total by 14 and is on pace to just smash his target total from last season. So it's kind of fun. If you were able to draft early and get Darrell Henderson, you stumbled into a pretty high level RB1 there.
And are we good points all around, same page? Are we in agreement that Sony Michel, let's say we got him on our team right now, we bench him this week because we don't know what's going to happen. He doesn't get a ton of work. Are we on the same page that for the fantasy playoffs? So if you're still contending, he's got to stay on your bench because in my opinion, personally, if I have the choice between a wide receiver that I'm never touching and never putting into my lineup or Sony Michel, who is going to go back to that workload, knock on wood, if anything happens again, I'm keeping Sony Michel versus that wide receiver that I'm never going to touch. Same page there, or
yeah, keep Sony Michel stashed, but yeah, as long as Darrell Henderson's active, you cannot confidently start Michel.
Yeah, I agree. I'm always stashing high end handcuff running backs for the playoffs, just because running backs tend to get hurt easier, and you never know.
Who cares about standalone value this time of year? Give me Samaje Perine, Khalil Herbert, all those guys. I'll load up my bench.
I'm the same. I have in a keeper league right now. I just made the playoffs from this last week from a home league, and my whole bench is nothing but running backs, and I think I have one wide receiver with some upside. I forgot which guy it is, just in too many leagues, but it's for 2 reasons. Because of that, I got guys on my bench that if I need to plug them in because of COVID, or if somebody goes down, or if I just don't want my opponents to play them, I'm keeping all these running backs on my bench this time of year. I'm going to be that guy. Speaking of COVID, so 2 guys today out with COVID that are very significant to many people's teams right now. One is Waddle for the Miami Dolphins, the rookie, and the other one is Lockett for the Seahawks, which is terrible. I was just on a show yesterday. I did a fantasy draft for the playoffs with Kevin, and one of my picks, my flex play, was Waddle, just because of how great he's been. He's been awesome. So that sucks. That's terrible. So now you got to kind of plan, what do I do? What guys can I pick up off of waivers? Who's available? And one guy that popped right back up last week, I want to talk about because he's a rookie. A lot of people see him pretty talented. But after trending down weeks 12 and 13, he went down to 44 and 45% of the snaps with 5 total targets between those 2 games. Rashad Bateman, he had a turnaround in week 14. He played 65% of the snaps, and then he had 7 catches on 8 targets for 103 receiving yards, 17.3 fantasy points. So he went from trending up, he was seeing some targets, and then trending down, and then popped back up. And it wasn't even the starting quarterback who was giving him some of those targets, but he played a lot. So a lot of people are wondering, can I trust this guy? So the fact or fiction question here, Rashad Bateman, fact or fiction, can be trusted as a flex play now. Dave, what's your thoughts on Rashad Bateman?
Oh man, I'm gonna say false, and this is one where it was tough. I feel like the way this question is worded, it makes it a little bit difficult because flex play, sure. Trusted, not at all. You can put him in there because we know he's got some upside, but I don't know how confident you can feel about it. So I'm saying false here because he has been pretty cold. I mean, this team early in the season was able to support Marquise Brown as a wide receiver 1 and at the end of last year, actually, and it was really excited to see. But now that we have 2 good wide receivers there, it's just way too hard to trust either of these guys with how much the Ravens run the ball. Not only has Bateman not really been living up to his expectations, but Marquise Brown, his production has just completely disappeared since Bateman has been coming on like this. So last week was his breakout game, but really he put up 17 points. I mean, if that's his ceiling, sure, touchdown could have boosted that a little bit, but I just can't really do it. The targets are there, but no, I can't really trust him this week.
And I was personally, I was like pounding the table when he was getting those consistent 8 targets. But like you said, when you're getting some volume and that's your ceiling at 17 after you received those targets a couple weeks ago, it's a little sketchy. But Jeremy, same page, or do you have a little bit more faith in Rashad Bateman this time of year too? What's your thoughts? Fact or fiction? He can be trusted as a flex.
I agree. So we're 3 for 3. I'm going fiction on this one as well.
The next one, everybody's going to argue on.
Yeah,
I don't even know what the next one is, but we'll see.
Maybe we'll argue with the next one. But yeah, I'm going to go with false as well, just because what you had alluded to, Nick, mentioning the snap share going down, the target share going down. What is interesting is the quarterback situation here, because it seems like Huntley has a much better repertoire with Bateman than he does Brown. So it seems like he trusted him and he was giving him those opportunities in that game, as well as Bateman's almost the way that offense kind of is schemed. Bateman doesn't really take the deep shots as much. He kind of seems to work that intermediate, the slants, kind of just where Huntley was getting the ball out quick. So it was working for what Bateman does in that offense, where Marquise Brown's kind of stretching the field. He does also still do the other stuff, but he's more of that field stretcher role with the speed that he has. So I don't know if it's more of that, but I just really don't trust him. Also, just because, like David mentioned, I mean, he doesn't score touchdowns. Mark Andrews is there. Mark Andrews is a beast at the tight end position, and just that way that offense runs. And Devontae Freeman has stepped up and looks as a solid running back right now. Like, if I need a running back and I was going into the playoffs, Devontae Freeman was a good person to try and add, because he was probably cheap in Dynasty, even redraft. And he's just been so good and consistent lately, just because, like what David alluded to, they just run the ball so much, and he stepped up and become the guy there. So for me, it's just the whole offense. There's a lot of talent. There's guys that are doing different things, and it's just too much with Lamar struggling at the moment, and then now the injury and possibly a backup quarterback. I'm out. I'd rather take, I don't know, like Gabe Davis, somebody that has the touchdown upside. You know what I mean? That's going to see 8-7 targets and have a chance at a touchdown, where I feel like Bateman doesn't have that right now.
I love that Devonta Freeman call out, though, man. Devonta Freeman, he just,
right?
I picked him up for free in so many leagues at like the midway point, and I've just been able to plug him in as a flex without even thinking twice about it every single week. It's been nice.
Yeah, as soon as they signed him, I went out and grabbed him too, just because everybody was going after Murray, and I was like, well, he's the free one. I guess I'll take him, and it worked out. But
they were smart about it.
Playoffs, but because my team
they were smart though. They got all the veterans. They rounded them all up, and they're like, whoever wins this race is going to be that guy. And it was Freeman. They had Lev Bell, Latavius Murray. He got hurt, but still, Freeman's been he's been good. Speaking on that, you mentioned Gabe Davis. I'm going to throw out 2 other names. Don't have to have an explanation. Let's just say you're juggling between these guys, because all 3 I think are pretty available still. I just looked. So Russell Gage is one. He's still ESPN rostered in 50.2%. So he's right above that 50% mark. But Russell Gage, KJ Osborne is another guy trending right now. Those 2 guys, Rashad Bateman. If you had to flex one of those, just throw the name out there. Who would it be for you guys?
Gage.
Yeah, I'd go between Gage. I really like Osborne. I just think that the way that offense runs, and it's been seen, Adam Thielen and Jefferson were wide receiver 1s all season. So, Osborne should be able to get you wide receiver 2 or 3 numbers pretty easily, even if he's not as talented as Thielen. So,
all right, we'll shift over to the next one. Talking about trust again. Now, I threw 2 names into this, but you can vent about either one of these guys, because both have been a little frustrating lately. But I'm talking about the Dallas Cowboys here. So fantasy focus here, focusing on the fantasy aspect. So Dak Prescott, he scored 2.64, 25.3, 11.2, and then 9.94 fantasy points from weeks 11 through 14. I felt that because I got him in a couple places, and it's not fun. The average for that has been 13.53 fantasy points. Zeke, on the other hand, he scored under 10 fantasy points in back-to-back games, which is not what you expect out of a guy you probably drafted in the first round and redraft. And under 13 points in 3 out of 4 of his last games. So fact or fiction? So I wrote down here, Cooper and Lamb are the only trustworthy Cowboys. Zeke and Dak are boom or bust at this point. Jeremy, fact or fiction on Zeke and Dak being boom or bust, a little untrustworthy right now?
100% fact with personal vendettas involved.
All right.
I have Dak pretty much everywhere in a lot of spots, because again, he was another guy that was fairly affordable in Superflex or any other format, that you were like, oh, he's had the talent. We've seen it. He's coming off an injury, but he should be all right. He looks pretty good. He had a long time to heal. And it seems that there's just something going on, whether it's Kellen Moore, whether it's the offense. I don't know. But for some odd reason, Dak is just all over the board right now, as well as that Cowboys offense. So for me, he's really boomer bust. And I mean, I would be willing to play some other quarterbacks over him at this point, as sad as that sounds, just because even his boom weeks haven't been great. And especially with Zeke too. Zeke's just kind of, you can tell that Zeke's hurt. You know what I mean? They keep telling you he's not, but you can tell from what he was earlier in the season, the explosiveness, the speed, just everything in general. You can tell that the knee is probably bothering him or something else is bothering him that isn't been broken out yet. But I'm out on both of them, honestly, at least at this point in the season. I think I have Zeke this week as like an RB3, just because unless he scores a touchdown, he's just pretty much useless in that offense at the moment, especially if Pollard comes back. And I'm in on Cooper and Lamb. I mean, it seems like they're still at least getting their share, especially in PPR, just because they're still throwing the ball. It's just that it's not really producing a ton for Dak's side of it.
Which is interesting, too, when you say, like, I like the wide receivers, but the quarterback, I don't know if I'm going to play him. And another factor that you mentioned, some things that are hurting Dak, is the defense, man. Defense is just playing awesome. So and now he's not depended on to come back from a deficit and chase the game through the air. So I think that's kind of hurting his stock as well, which kind of makes me nervous this week against the Giants, especially if the defense kind of eats whoever's the quarterback during this game alive. But Dave, fact or fiction, Zeke and Dak are boomer busts. They're untrustworthy at this point.
Well, I'm going to go with fact when you say Zeke and Dak are boomer bust, but I'm going to call fiction when you say that Cooper and Lamb are the only trustworthy Cowboys. Because
fair.
Michael Gallup, man, 8+ targets in 4 straight games. When he came back from that injury, he was limited. He didn't get his full run, but 8+ targets in the 4 games since he's been back. He's seen 8, 9, 9, and 10. I mean, it might not be translating into consistent fantasy output, but that is a nice target share. So I think that Gallup is somebody that you can kind of rely on right now. But I understand what you're saying with Dak. He is boomer bust, but Zeke, he's had some bad luck these past couple of weeks, but he's got the 4th most carries inside the 5-yard line. He's top 15 in targets with 4.2. So he's still getting those premium touches, and I completely agree with what Jeremy said. He doesn't have that burst that he did early in the season. But now with Pollard nursing a plantar fascia tear, which I have had before, and I can, attest to how painful it is. And we've seen it year after year after year. When people get these injuries, they can play through it, but it just completely zaps their burst. So I think right now, considering that injury to Pollard, Zeke is hands down the better running back. So I think that he should get a little bit extra run because he's getting the goal line work, because he's getting the targets. I think you can still rely on him and expect him to bounce back this week.
And Dave, you mentioned Gallup, and he's been getting some work, and especially if you're in a little bit deeper of a league, he's probably a play every week. So my question, kind of piggybacking off of that, with Gallup looking pretty good with his usage and getting the looks, does that mean Dalton Schultz is not a guy we can trust? I mean, I keep using the word trust, and it depends on your fantasy team. I mean, if you're juggling Dalton Schultz or I don't know, Evan Ingram or something, you might still say, oh, well, I'm going to go with Schultz or whatever your team outlook looks like. But looking at the last 2 games for Schultz, 9.3 and 1.4 fantasy points. So do you think Gallup is hurting Schultz?
Yeah, absolutely. And Schultz was taking a lot of his snaps out of the slot. And now that they've got all 3 wide receivers healthy, they don't need that from him as much. So, Dalton Schultz has fallen out of my tight end 1 rankings in this week.
All right. So I have to paint the picture for this next one. So I'm sitting at the gym this morning. I set my alarm 4:30 every day. I get up. I get there by 5. I'm working out. It's me and like 3 older people, and we're doing our own things. And I see on the TV, Urban Meyer has been fired. I'm like, oh, no shit. I'm like, right first thing in the morning, I'm like kind of blinking at it, and that's what happened today. So this might impact this question. Maybe it doesn't. But James Robinson is a interesting topic, to say the least, just because of what's happened lately. But he's been dealing with a heel and a knee issue for a few weeks now, I believe. He's also dealing with a lack of usage in his recent games. Week 13, he totaled 9 touches for 2.5 fantasy points. That's the Turner. Oh, I thought you were doing
Sorry.
we got sound effects on the board here for these down weeks. But week 14 totaled 6 touches for 0.4 fantasy points. That killed you if you used them. A lot of people pointed the finger to Urban Meyer. Some people attribute it to an injury or the running back coach. A lot of questions here. Fact or fiction, though, James Robinson needs to be, I'm going to say, benched in the fantasy playoffs at this point, based off of these last 2 weeks. Jeremy, we'll start with you. What are we thinking here? James Robinson needs to be benched. Fact or fiction?
I'm going to say fiction. From everything that has come out amongst why James Robinson wasn't being used, it was clear. I mean, he had some fumbles, some turnovers, and it was clear that from what I was seeing and reading that it was basically Urban Meyer that didn't want to put him back out there. So obviously, like you alluded to earlier this morning, Urban Meyer is no longer a issue in Jacksonville. So for me, I expect James Robinson to get back up into that 50 to 60% snap share, which he wasn't at the last couple weeks. And he's going up against Houston and the Jets and then New England in the fantasy playoffs the next 3 weeks. The Texans and the Jets are 26th and 32nd in points allowed to running backs. So for me, I'm all in on James Robinson. When he's up in that 50, 60% snap share, he only had 2 weeks that he was below double-digit fantasy points, and that was the first 2 weeks of the season. So for me, I'm in on it. I have been loving James Robinson all year, and anything that I had for like, go get this guy for the playoffs, get ready to stash him. Like, I just liked the schedule he had, and I just knew the usage was going to be there. And I was very surprised by the benching. Obviously, fumbles and the coaches handle it differently, but I think the talent's there. We've seen it last year. He's just too good of a back that if he gets that workload, and I think that this Jaguars team will look a lot different without Urban Meyer there. So I'm in on it. I think that he should be started, at least as a flex. There's no way I'm benching him unless I have a stacked roster. So
all running back roster going on. But Dave, same question, fact or fiction, based off of these 2 down weeks for James Robinson. And by down, I mean down, 2.5 fantasy points and 0.4 fantasy points. I had to make sure I emphasize the 0 there, 0.4. Fact or fiction, James Robinson should be benched for the fantasy playoffs.
Fiction. And like Jeremy said, if you got a stacked roster, like, congratulations, but I don't think that you got 3 guys inside the top 20, and that's kind of where James Robinson falls for me, like a mid to low end RB2. And the only reason he falls into there is because there still is a little bit of concern that maybe this injury is lingering. But 2 weeks ago, I did a video, leading into last weekend, and I put this video out on YouTube and Reddit and everywhere. And I said, should you be concerned with James Robinson? And every smart guy out there that thought that they had an original response said the same exact thing. No, I'm not worried about James Robinson. I'm worried about Urban Meyer. Well, Urban Meyer's gone now, and that was my concern. People didn't watch the video. They just wanted to try to argue with me there, but that's exactly what I said in the video is Urban Meyer is a problem, and if he's the head coach there, you've got to be concerned because he is a psychotic egomaniac that's going to bench the best player that the quarterback wants on the field for seemingly no reason. So with Urban Meyer gone, yeah, you've got to assume that he's going to get back up there. I had a whole thing prep talking about snap share and how dominant he is when he does get those snaps. Jeremy covered all of it already, so I don't have anything else to say. Yeah, unless you've got 3 top 20 running backs, you're starting James Robinson this week. Which
you must have been like a mastermind psychic at this point with all the injuries we've had this year to the running back position. But side question. So same team. And I'm just throwing curveballs out as we go. I'm just thinking nonstop. Does Urban Meyer being gone mean that we trust any of the pass catchers in this system? Do you guys have faith in anybody?
No.
All right.
I mean, maybe not this time of year. Maybe if it was week 8, week 9, sure, I might try it out. But I'm not putting Laviska Shenault in a playoff lineup.
Yeah, if I had to at tight end, maybe just because their tight ends see an absurd amount of targets. And the tight end landscape is even worse than the running back landscape with injuries and just guys that aren't normally there. So maybe, but probably not.
And the ceiling for those guys is pretty limited, seeing that since the bye week, they had a bye in week 7. Trevor Lawrence has thrown 2 touchdowns since, we're talking weeks 8 through 14 there. So 2 touchdowns across that span. So it's not like they're getting some touchdowns and maybe somebody – they always say like someone's going to fall into the end zone. Usually that's a running back, but it could be a short yardage to a wide receiver. It's not happening. They're not throwing touchdowns. So you literally cap your upside for everybody there. I also got a sleeper notification here. I thought it was interesting, and it comes to a side point, and maybe you guys can chime in for this. But teams with the most players on the reserve COVID list. This was just put out 6:29, so a handful of minutes ago. Rams 25, Washington 21, Browns 20, Bears 12, Texans 8, Dolphins 6, Vikings 6. So we got some guys in the 20s right now. And any advice? This is a side note on the podcast here. Any advice for all of these COVID notices popping up for fantasy managers heading into the weekend? We got a Saturday game, so if you're listening, we can't assume everybody's on the same page for everything. We have two games on Saturday, so make sure you're aware of that. But any advice to these guys?
Jeremy, go ahead. I got nothing, man. Say your prayers and hope for the best.
Start your players on Thursday and Saturday night.
Yeah,
I don't know. If it's a close decision, I saw something. I don't exactly know who it was. They tweeted it just before I got on here. I was kind of just scrolling through Twitter, and I saw someone tweet that, basically saying that, if you have a decision right now between Mike Williams and, say, Rashad Bateman as your wide receiver 3, start Mike Williams because he's playing, and you don't know what's going to happen between now and Sunday. Bateman could go down with COVID or.
I saw John Daigle say that. He's like, people are really talking about benching Eckler for a limited workload when you don't even know who's going to be able to play on Sunday.
Yeah, I think I don't remember who it was, but I did see something just like that too as well on Eckler too. That it was like, it just because he's limited, at least he's playing. You don't know. I mean, the Browns could lose Nick Chubb soon. You don't know. I mean, it's obviously going through the whole thing. I know, right? I need him. So
that's a good point. If it's two guys with similar value, right? Similar maybe scoring throughout the season. I saw somebody comment like, I'm not going to sit there and bench Eckler for Darren Williams, or I'm not going to sit there and bench a wide receiver for Jalen Guyton tonight. Well, nobody's saying that. They're saying if it's a close call and you're going to bet on somebody, maybe it's that route. The other thing I just say, hey, like you have to check your lineups more than you ever have. There's 2 games on Saturday, probably 30 minutes to an hour before both of those games. I'd say within that window, probably under an hour, I would be checking your lineup, just a quick spot check. And if you see somebody with an O or got the COVID sign, then you got to make a move. But now is the time to check your lineups more than you usually do, which I'm a psycho about it, but some people are super casual about it. So that's all I have.
I got to say, man, I'm starting Justin Fields in my home league playoff right now.
Oh, that's
he
good.
plays Monday night, and just the fear, like I am terrified that I'm going to wake up Monday morning to be like Justin Fields on the COVID reserve list. And you can't go pick up Kirk Cousins. Like if you're waiting until Monday night to start your quarterback, you can end up getting screwed, and there's no option to pivot to. So it's pretty nerve-wracking.
Yeah. I mean, you better have Nick Foles on deck. Isn't Andy Dalton out right now?
Oh my God! Starting Nick Foles in round 1. Yeah, exactly how I thought this was.
I'm going to drop my bench running back for Nick Foles just in case.
I'm in a dynasty league that I have Jalen Hurts and Kirk Cousins. Those are my quarterbacks right now. Jalen Hurts is hurt, and then like you said, the Vikings are up there and COVID stuff starting to hit, and I'm like, oh gosh. And like you said, it's Monday night, so I think that's when they play, right?
Yep.
They play Sunday.
Yep.
Nope. Monday night, Bears and Vikings.
So
yeah.
All right. Let's get rolling with the next one. Trying to get through as many as we can. We'll be under an hour here just because we have the game going on, and I don't want to take up too much of these guys' time. So this is very important for tonight's game. So if people are listening, maybe they're juggling things around. It has to do with the pass catchers for the Chargers. Maybe this is a quicker one, but in the Week 14 absence of Keenan Allen, Jalen Guyton caught 3 balls for 87 yards and a touchdown for 17.7 fantasy points. Rookie Joshua Palmer said, I'm going to try to match that, and he nearly did by 0.1 points. He had 17.6, but he caught 5 passes for 66 yards and a touchdown. Very similar days for those guys as far as fantasy points. So my question is, fact or fiction? Jalen Guyton so it can be either one of these guys, Josh Palmer, have earned themselves further opportunities even when Keenan Allen is back, which is tonight. Dave, is that fact or fiction?
Fiction. Man, we just see this. This is Keenan Allen's season. Like as the weather gets cold, he puts on the long sleeves and the hood. That's when he starts balling out. I mean, since the start of his career, his touchdown rate post week 10 is twice as high as it is in the first 10 games of the season. Right now, he's at 10.3 targets per game, which is the 5th most in the league. And I get it. Mike Williams had a really hot start to the season, but this is still Keenan Allen's team. So with him back, I mean, he is the guy. He's the stud there. Then you got Mike Williams playing the downfield threat, Jared Cook playing that tight end / slot role, and Donald Parham as the red zone tight end. And then you've got Eckler taking all of his touches and catches out of the backfield as well. I just don't think that there are enough mouths to feed. That's such a cliche, too many mouths to feed, too many chefs in the kitchen, whatever you want to say. But I don't understand how those guys are going to get their opportunity when everybody else is healthy. If I had to pick one, Josh Palmer, I really like him. I think that they're kind of grooming him to take on that Mike Williams role if he is to leave next season. But as far as the rest of this year, no, I don't think Guyton or Palmer are going to be a thing.
The thing with Guyton that I always remember from last year is like he was on the field a ton and he was just running around because he wasn't getting any targets. He was out there for like 80 to 90% of the snaps and he's just running around. He's like a diversion player of some sorts. But Keenan Allen, man, after the bye week has been amazing. So it was terrible that he had to miss that game, but he is the guy. And I struggle to see any sort of good opportunity, especially in leagues that are not like deep, to play either one of these guys. I was talking to a buddy of mine today. He still had Guyton in his lineup, and I'm like, hey, sometimes the projection says enough when the guy's projected now 5.6 fantasy points. It's not the 14 or whatever he was projected the week before. But Jeremy, fact or fiction, Guyton, Palmer, have these guys earned themselves a bigger role and that we can apply for fantasy?
I would say fact. I think they earned it.
I like this. This is different now. I like it.
Josh Palmer earned it, but I can also agree with Dave that I don't think he gets it. I think that Palmer definitely earned it. He looked impressive. I feel like he, like David said, he's kind of getting groomed for either the Mike Williams role, but he was a clear step in for Keenan Allen. Less targets, but he kind of played that role where Keenan Allen would have. So I think he earned it, but we saw it all year. He's only ever seen like 1 or 2 targets when both those guys are in the lineup. And it's kind of the same. There just kind of seems like it's Mike Williams, it's Jared Cook, Keenan Allen, and Austin Eckler, and that's who's on the field. And they don't really change out of it. So
sucks because I love Josh Palmer. He's a fun dude to watch. Yeah,
he is.
He was a guy preseason I was like throwing out there like, hey, the opportunity might be there. But like you said, Dave, they're using guys with specific roles. And sometimes that means that a guy who's talented might not get the share of the offense that he probably will see in the future. But definitely a dynasty guy down the road that might pan out there for the Chargers, especially seeing him tied to Justin Herbert. Another wide receiver on the list here. My biggest whiff of the fantasy season. I didn't fade him. I like the other guy in the system more for the Rams. And I was, a big Robert Woods guy. Should have looked at, 2 years ago or whatever it was that Cooper Kupp was very good for fantasy. But this year, I don't think anybody predicted this sort of season though. Cooper Kupp, he's currently 73.2. I talk PPR in here as far as scoring. 73.2 fantasy points ahead of the wide receiver 2 right now, which is unbelievable. So if you look at, I threw this out on a tweet earlier. If we look at weeks 1 through 14, the wide receiver 1, going back, I think, till 2012, I looked at, the closest guy to what Cooper Kupp has scored was Antonio Brown, and he scored 312.6. And that was the, I believe, 2014 season. Yep. I believe, 2014. Antonio Brown.
2015.
Yep. It was that. So that was the closest that somebody scored to Cooper Kupp at this point of the year. I mean, the guy's been unbelievable. He leads so many categories for the year. You can go down the list and throw out the stats, but he's number one for most things. He's been amazing. So I got to ask, fact or fiction? Cooper Kupp for redraft is a first-round draft pick next year. Dave, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I'll go fact, and I'll even step it up a notch and say that he deserves to be a top 5 pick next year. I mean, what he's doing right now is just absolutely insane. Scott Barrett tweeted it out earlier today. He is having the best fantasy football season for a wide receiver in NFL history, and that's not being hyperbolic. 1995 Jerry Rice right now is the bar. That's the best fantasy season of all time, and Cooper Kupp is about to smash that. You talked about 2015 Antonio Brown, 2007 Randy Moss. It doesn't matter. Cooper Kupp is going to smash all of those records. He could even slow down his pace and still have the best season of all time. His week-to-week floor is insane. This guy is just a lock for 10 targets every single week. So, if he finishes at his current pace, he's going to be a top 5 pick. Even if he slows down for the rest of the season, I think he still has already locked in his spot in the first round.
All right. Fair enough on those points. Shout out to Scott Barrett on the show here twice. Huge fan of his, huge fan of his and what he does for fantasy points. Jeremy, same question, fact or fiction? Cooper Kupp is a first-round draft pick next year for redraft.
I'm going to be that guy. I'm going to say fiction. He's probably going to get drafted in the first round, but I don't know if he should. like we're alluding to, this is possibly the greatest season ever in fantasy football. And what comes with that, I'm a pessimist sometimes, maybe you can call it, but regression. I just don't see him reproducing what he's doing. The wide receiver position, there's such a turnover as wide receiver ones that for me, I think you see OBJ now that's probably going to be there again next year. Robert Woods will be back most likely next year. Cam Akers is going to be back. It's going to become one of those again where it's like how many mouths are able to be fed with all of this volume. I mean, they may continue to give Cooper Kupp 10 targets, and maybe I eat my words again because I ate them again this year when I said Robert Woods was going to be the better wide receiver. I was wrong, but I don't know if I see it being a wide receiver, or at least in the first round again in redraft. Like I said, he probably will because of what he just did this year. I just expect some regression, and I don't know if he finishes even as like in the top 12 fantasy players. Do you know what I mean? So
one guy that comes to mind, and I'm not going to compare the two because the numbers don't lie for Cooper Kupp. I mean, you can't compare something that happened last year to this year because he's above everybody. But is there any? I mean, Stephon Diggs. I had him, I think, as my wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 going into the season. This year, I think he's 10, which is fine, but he's below the expectations, and he dropped off for those big games he had last year, I think, just more often. I think there was just more often a bigger Stephon Diggs game than he's had this season. He's been good, but we had that drop-off. Is there any correlation for those two, or are we saying that these numbers are just so high that it should stay consistent, same sort of situation quarterback? Is any thoughts on that?
I think it'll stay consistent. I mean, this guy, in 2018, before he tore his ACL, he was the wide receiver 2 overall before going down with an injury, and that was with Jared Goff as his quarterback. The next season, he went out for almost 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns, again with Jared Goff. So this guy has been really good his entire season, or his entire career. Last year, he was banged up with some injuries and had a down year. But now that he's got the best quarterback of all time, or his best quarterback, sorry, I did not say Matthew Stafford. His best quarterback.
I got bold.
Yeah. No, Matthew Stafford, though, I mean, that is a huge upgrade for him. We see this offense has just completely changed rather than just, pounding the rock and, these little dump offs to tight ends. Now they're throwing the ball downfield. They're using everything. And that's what I like about Cooper Kupp is he doesn't have a role. It kind of reminds me of Antonio Brown when he had his, top 3 finishes 5 out of 6 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's because you couldn't just put a guy on him and know what to expect. He'd take a bubble screen, he'd take an end around, and then he'd blow the top off the defense 50 yards downfield. I mean, they use him everywhere. And I think that versatility can keep him from regressing just because they can do so much with him.
I agree on that. We'll stay on the wide receiver page. Two left, and we'll get through. We got 13 minutes here. My math's close enough. Another guy. So I got to bring this up too. Stop doing this. I tweeted this out too. Stop doing this. Stop putting a picture of Hunter Renfro next to DK Metcalf. I don't know if either one of you guys did it, but if you did, I'm sure it wasn't today. But still today,
I did with Brian Edwards. That was mine.
All right. Well, fair enough. But I've seen the same thing. Somebody Googles shirtless DK Metcalf and then Hunter Renfro in college, and they keep doing it over and over again. But I mean, I get it. He's been a stud. I'm going to talk about both those guys. We'll start with Hunter Renfro. But since the bye in week 8, weeks 9 through 14, Hunter Renfro has been the wide receiver 3 just overall. He's averaged 18.8 fantasy points during the span. Targets have been amazing. I mean, they've been very good for him. He's had 3 games and 9 targets, a 10-target game, and most recently a 14-target game during that span. So my question to you guys, we'll start with Jeremy. Fact or fiction, Hunter Renfro is a top 10 wide receiver rest of season, which is the fantasy playoffs.
I'm going to say fact. This is basically solely based off of Darren Waller. And obviously Darren Waller is struggling to come back. And obviously I'm basically saying this off of a premise of what we've seen. In the beginning of the season, he barely saw anything over 10 targets. He never saw anything over 10 when Waller was in the lineup. In this small span where Waller's gone down the last 3 weeks, he's seen that target share and he's produced. He's had over 100 yards in the last 3 weeks. So now it comes and begs to that question of if Waller comes back, will he have the same viability just because of how good he's playing right now? But especially with Waller out again this week, I mean, you got 3 more weeks of the fantasy season, and Waller's injury obviously is enough concerning that they're continuing to hold him out. You may not see Darren Waller the rest of the season, depending on how the Raiders season goes. So for me, I'm in on Hunter Renfro.
I have to be careful with the rest of season call all the time because there's 3 weeks. It's the fantasy playoffs. That's how it should be labeled. But you bring up an interesting point though with Waller because he missed week 7, but weeks 1 through 6 when he was out there, Renfro averaged 12.9 fantasy points, and then weeks 9 through 11, Waller's back out there running around. He averaged 14.3 fantasy points. So very different. Not going to take anything away from the guy, but his presence obviously had an impact. It looks like he's not going to be back. Maybe he'll be back next week. We're not sure. But Dave, Factor Fiction, same page as Jeremy. We're asking Hunter Renfro is a top 10 wide receiver, not rest of the season, in the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, and I'm going to say fiction just because I do expect Waller to come back. And at the end of the day, we're speculating here. Jeremy doesn't know anything when it comes to, the ins and outs of Waller. I don't know either. I expect him to be back. But if he isn't, as long as he's out, yeah, I think that he, is a top 10 receiver. And just when you look at it, with Darren Waller, Hunter Renfro is averaging 7.3 targets and 52 yards per game. Over the last 3 weeks when Waller's been hurt, 11 targets and 117 yards. So he's literally doubling his yardage, seeing 4 extra targets per game. And so you got to look at him with that type of production as a top 10 guy.
And I mentioned before the shirtless DK pictures with Hunter Renfro just because he's been a boss. I mean, he's been great for fantasy. So I got to go to DK. And now, I gave you guys this topic in advance just so we can think on it. But there's an impact now. There's a Tyler Lockett impact. He's on the COVID list. Doesn't mean he's out for the fantasy playoffs, but probably not going to play this week. But I guess the timelines for things have changed slightly for when it comes to COVID and clearances. But Since the bye, DK Metcalf has yet to score above 11 fantasy points. So that means during the span of games where he's been down, that was his ceiling, was 11 fantasy points. Weeks 10 through 14, just for overall wide receivers, he's been the wide receiver 56. Not good. He's averaged 6.9 fantasy points. Not good. So factor fiction, and we may have to throw Lockett in there, but it's still a question just because the production has been down, but factor fiction, it's time to bench DK Metcalf at this point. Jeremy, we could start with you. Factor fiction, bench DK Metcalf.
I'm going to say fiction, and the only reason now is obviously Tyler Lockett's COVID issues. But I also just sit there and think, I get that he's having a down time, but like, who are you benching him for? I feel like depending on your roster, I mean, his ceiling is so high. And right now, it's just the Seahawks are they're just trying to figure it out. Russ's finger's probably still affecting him to an extent. So for me, I'm still probably starting DK Metcalf as like at least a flex play. But again, if you have a small roster, yeah, I would. I feel like this one's a hard one to just nail fact and fiction just because of who DK Metcalf is. It's just so hard for me to just say, yeah, sit DK Metcalf. For a guy that was
Hunter Renfro, yeah, then you bench him.
Yeah, obviously, and the pictures line up. Like I'm gonna,
I think you bring up a
six pack.
Yeah, that's true. I think you bring up a great point though when it comes to any like taking advice or giving advice is that the leagues and the depth of the leagues are very different. So again, like you said, if you got 4 bench spots, what are you going to do? Who are you going to pick up from the waivers and plug in for DK Metcalf? Or if I am in a dynasty league, I got 20 bench spots, 25, maybe I have some leeway to plug in somebody else that I have some more confidence in. But it does draw the question because I think as people who give advice, we get these questions all the time, like, should I bench DK? And that's a good question to the question, like, who would you bench him for? But it's still important to address. So Dave's same page or different page, fact or fiction, it's time to bench DK.
Yeah, I'm saying fiction. And this offseason, I was arguably the biggest DK Metcalf hater, and I got a lot of flack for it. And, my fear was just that I don't want to say he's one-dimensional, but the fact that he started off the season on such a tear last year, and then defenses just said, we're just going to cap him. We're not going to let him get that deep shot. And he was unable to adjust to it. He didn't diversify his route tree. They just still kept throwing him, on these go routes. Over 50% of his routes last year came on slants and goes. And that's exactly what we're seeing this year too. So I don't think you can bench him. He's already got 2 games this season where he has multiple touchdowns. And knowing that he has that week-to-week upside, you have to put him in your lineup. The usage is still there too. 8 targets in 4 of his last 5 games. So the opportunity is there. The skill's there. The ceiling is there. And because of that, you really can't bench him. unfortunately, this is just something that you kind of, I feel like the writing was on the wall there a little bit. We saw this last year where he had some duds, and it's not just, an off game where he's getting 60 yards or something like that. Like when he misses hard. Like I'm talking sub 30 yards and no touchdowns. And that's kind of, if you've had DK Metcalf last year and this year, you know that he has those ups and downs. But knowing how high his ceiling is, I can't think of any situation where you're benching him.
And I like the fact that you pointed out. I had the same sort of things, just jotting down notes. 8 targets, like you said, in 4 out of 5 his last game. It's a good sign. Also, we've seen it this season. We've seen it this season before the bye. 3 weeks during that span of 22 plus fantasy points. So it's not like we're talking about, and we're Bears fans, 2 of us in here. It's not like we're talking about Allen Robinson, who has not scored 12 fantasy points all year. We're talking about a guy we've actually seen do it this season. And you'd hate for you to bench him at this point of the year, now knowing that one guy's out of the picture, and then he goes off for 21 points, and your guy from the waiver wire, a KJ Osborne, has 12 or something like that. So definitely a good point there. Last thing before we end things, and you don't have to give an explanation. We'll clip it. You can victory lap it. Give me one guy this week that you have some faith in. It's not an obvious start. You're like, this is my guy for the week. And if you hit, we'll clip it and we'll say, hey, look at this guy on the show, victory lap for him. But give me any guy that you say, hey, it's not obvious. It's not Dalvin Cook. It's this guy. Jeremy, give me your one guy.
I'll go with the Bears. I mean, maybe he's obvious at this point, but I'm going to take Darnell Mooney. I think that it's probably a little bit more obvious, but he's facing Minnesota, who's the worst. I think they're the worst right now against wide receivers and points per game to wide receivers. And I just like what Justin Fields is going to bring. And I think Darnell Mooney could have one of those 120-yard games that he gets every now and then. Seems like every week that he has a good fantasy week, he has like the same exact stat line. So I'm going to go for it, 120 yards. I'm going to take it. I think Darnell Mooney's definitely going to be a good start this week.
And that'll be good for Dave, who said that he's going to start Justin Fields in a league Monday night. So, Dave, who is your guy, the non-obvious starter for the week for you?
Again, this guy might be a little bit obvious. We even talked about him earlier in the show, but Russell Gage has very quietly just been a great play. Since week 10, he has out-targeted Kyle Pitts every single week. Over that stretch, he's seen 8.3 targets per game and 76.3 yards per game. Now, over that 4-week stretch, unfortunately, he's only found the end zone once. So you'd think that would hurt his value. He's still the wide receiver 12. With 1 touchdown in 4 games, he's still the wide receiver 12. So right now, I mean, he is the wide receiver 1 for the Atlanta Falcons. At this point, I don't want to speculate too much because I don't know what's going on with Calvin Ridley, but I don't see many situations where Calvin Ridley comes back this year. He's definitely not coming back this week, so I think that you can safely fire up Russell Gage as a pretty high-end wide receiver too.
I'm all about that. Been pounding the table for him too. I was a fan of his last year for some of his productive games too. And he's still out there floating, like I said before, in ESPN leagues, 50.2%. So there's a chance he's still just sitting on the waiver wire. Definitely a guy to at least have on your fantasy team. But good stuff tonight, guys. We have a game coming up. We got the Chargers versus the Chiefs. Should be interesting. It's the first game of the fantasy playoffs. A lot of bad things happening, so I'm hoping for a good game tonight. But I do want to thank both of you guys for taking the time out of your schedule, especially during this time of year where there's tons of things going on, to both come on the show. So can you guys please remind everybody where to find you and then anything you want to plug to close things out? We'll start with you, Jeremy.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at PopesFFH. And like I said earlier in the show, you can find any of my writing or anything over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, as well as Yards Per Fantasy. And you can catch my podcast every now and then at the Fantasy Football Playmakers, usually Tuesdays. So,
all right.
And thanks Dave, again for having me on, Nick.
Absolutely. Great to have you back on. It's been like the 3rd or 4th time. So you're like part of the brand at this point. But Dave, where can we find you and anything you want to plug to close things out?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. That's Kluge. You can find all my written content and most of my video content over at Football Guys. You can find some written stuff over at Fantasy Pros, as well as all of my rankings. Just wanted to thank you for inviting me on, Nick. You were one of the few people that I got to meet in person before I got to do a show with. There aren't many people you get to say that about. So glad we were finally able to link up on a show together. Been a big fan of yours for a long time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that respect is definitely mutual. Great to have both of you guys on. Good show, good show. You can catch me on Sunday on the Fantasy Points Extra Point Show talking player props. I'm going to drop my own starts of the week video sometime tomorrow from my work office. Don't tell anybody, but that's what I got going on. Thank you guys for tuning in, and good luck in the fantasy playoffs this week. Stay tuned with all the COVID injuries and all that sort of news, and get after those ships. Have a good night, guys.